Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today I'm bringing you something a little bit late. Actually, today I'm going to be talking about pretty much every single album that I heard in 2019. I am sorry I'm getting this video out a bit late. I haven't really had any opportunities to record it, and I've been kind of trying to figure out what exactly I was going to do for this video because I heard a lot of music this year. I heard over 60 albums in total. So doing an actual ranking would be quite difficult. Doing like a full mini review for each album within the video would take too long. So I decided I'm just going to run through all of these, say a few words about them, like a sentence or two or whatever, maybe give one or two of my favorite songs, and then move on to the next one just so you guys can kind of get a sense of what I was into this year. Of course, there were quite a few albums that I just did not get around to listening to, like the newest albums from Mayhem, Cattle Decapitation, Wage War. There was some other ones as well that I'm just not remembering at the moment, but there was plenty of albums that I did not get to listen to. But I think for the most part I'm happy with what I listened to. I listened to pretty much everything that was higher priority for me, although I did really want to listen to the Cattle Decapitation and Mayhem albums as well, but I just didn't get around to those. So like I said, there is a lot to cover here, well over 60 albums, a couple EPs as well. So I'm not going to be ranking any of these, I'm just going to be going basically in alphabetical order, giving you guys my brief thoughts on each album. So without further ado, let's get started. First up is Metawar by Three Teeth. This is an industrial metal album, a band that is fairly new as well. This was a decent album. I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was anything incredible. It's got some good songs on it, but overall it was really nothing that memorable to me. But if you enjoy that style, then I can see you enjoying that album. Next, we've got Outstrider by Abbath. This is the second solo album from Abbath, who is the ex-vocalist of Immortal. This is a really great black metal album. If you enjoy stuff like Immortal or you enjoyed Abbath's first solo album, you'll probably like this. Some of my favorite songs include the title track, Outstrider, Harvest, Pyre, Calm, and Hurricane. There's a lot of great songs on here. Next up, we've got Spiritual Instinct by Alcest. This is a post-metal album, or a post-black metal, black gaze, whatever you want to call it, is what this album is, which is a subgenre that I wasn't really into before this year, but I did really enjoy this album. Again, it's nothing incredible, it didn't blow me away, but there's some really good stuff on here. My favorite song is probably Protection, which is the first song I heard on the album. It's the song that got me interested in the album. I really enjoy it a lot. Overall, it's a really solid album. Next, we've got Berserker by Amon Amarth. This is one of the albums I was looking forward to the most, since Amon Amarth is one of my favorite bands. I will say this was a bit disappointing. It's still a good album, don't get me wrong, but I would say it's their weakest since Fate of Norns, which was released way back in 2004, I believe. But there is some good stuff on it, like Mjolnir Hammer of Thor is a really good song, and then the two singles, Crack the Sky and Raven's Flight, are pretty decent. Fafnir's Gold, which is the first song on the album, is also quite good. So overall, it's good. Bit disappointing, but still good. Next, we've got Gods Without a Name by Aoratos. This is a black metal album that I really don't remember that much of. I remember I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was anything that incredible. I haven't really gone back to it at all. The album artwork is really nice, so it's memorable for that reason at least, but as far as the music, I didn't think it was anything incredible, but still pretty good. Next, we've got Dawn of Infinite Fire by Asagraum. This is a fairly new black metal band. This is their second album, and they're an entirely female black metal band, which is not something you see every day, so that's pretty cool. And the music here is really good as well. I really enjoyed it a lot. I've gone back to it a little bit. And overall, it's a really good album. If you're into black metal, I would definitely recommend you check it out. Next, we've got Shaped by Fire by As I Lay Dying. Once again, this was one of my most anticipated albums for the year, especially since the band got back together in 2018, and this album did not disappoint. It's one of my favorite albums of the year. It's really, really great. It might be their best album yet, or at least in the top 3. It's just a great album. Some of my favorite songs, My Own Grave, The Wreckage, The Toll It Takes, Take What's Left. There's a lot of great songs on this album, and I would highly recommend it. Next is Phantom Sessions by August Burns Red. This is an EP. It's not really anything incredible. It's got one original song, one song that I believe was a bonus track on Phantom Anthem, and then a cover of the theme song from The Legend of Zelda, plus a couple other extra acoustic versions and stuff. It's a pretty cool EP. The original song Midnight is actually really, really good. But overall, it's a good EP, not really anything incredible, but it's good. Up next is No More Hollywood Endings by Battle Beast. This is a power metal album, kind of in the vein of something like Sabaton, for example. I really didn't care for this album that much. I mean, it was alright. There was some good songs on it. I think the title track is pretty good, for example, but otherwise, this one didn't really stand out to me that much. It was just kind of a forgettable album. Next one is a bit interesting. We've got 2 albums by Batushka. Now, for those of you who don't know the situation surrounding this band, I won't really go into it here. Basically, there's 2 different versions of the band right now, one headed by the original creator of the band and the other headed by the vocalist of the band. So first is the album Hospodi, which was the album by the official version of Batushka, which is not the one that I personally support. I support the one that is with the creator of the band. This is the official Batushka album. I didn't think it was that great. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. It's a serviceable album by all means, but it wasn't that great. It wasn't anything really like the band's debut album. But the music was decent. I would probably enjoy it more if it wasn't for the whole drama surrounding this band. It was an alright album, but not anything that great. And then the album Panihida, which is the other album by the original creator of the band, which currently I guess is the unofficial version of Batushka, was a really great album. I would say it's on par with their debut, perhaps even better, and their debut is already an incredibly good album, and it's just a really great album overall. Next we've got From Hell With Love by Beast in Black. This is another power metal album, sort of somewhere between Judas Priest, Sabaton, and kind of 80s pop or something like that. It's got a very 80s feel to this album, which I really enjoyed a lot. It's a very catchy, fun album that's just a lot of fun to listen to. Some of my favorite songs include the title track, Cry Out for a Hero, Repentless. There's a lot of good songs on here as well. It's one of the albums that I've gone to the most consistently throughout the year. Definitely recommend it. Next is Belzebubs with Pantheon of the Nightside Gods. This is a very interesting album. It's actually based on a comic strip, which I thought was kind of cool, the band overall. It is kind of similar to Insomnium, but more of a black metal edge to that, which I think works really well. A lot of great songs on here as well, such as Nam Gloria Lucifer, Cathedrals of Mourning, and Blackened Call, which I believe were the 3 singles on the album. And overall, it's a really good listen. Not one of the best albums of the year, in my opinion, but it was very good. Next is The Simulation by Born of Osiris. This was a pretty good album, not one of the band's best, in my opinion, but still quite good. It's got some good songs on it, like Silence the Echo, for example. And overall, it's a solid album. Not incredible, but quite good. Next we have God Hand by Brand of Sacrifice. This is a deathcore album, and this is the band's debut album as well. It's a bit of a unique deathcore album based on what I've heard of the genre, at least, because I'm not really hugely into deathcore, but I really enjoyed this album a lot. I still go back to it quite often, and overall it's a really good album. Next up is The Ruins of Fading Light by Crypt. This is an album that has surprisingly been getting quite a bit of recognition, which is not something that I expected, but I really enjoyed this album quite a lot. It's very good. It's got some great songs on it. Overall, I would recommend it. Next, we've got Old Star by Darkthrone, which is one of the bands that kind of pioneered the style of black metal. They were one of the first big black metal bands. Honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of this album. I thought it was good. There was some good riffs, there was some good songs, but overall it was just kind of boring to me. It's kind of a mixture of the kind of crust punk style that the band has been kind of experimenting with over their last several albums and their typical black metal style that they are known for in their earlier material. That combination works, but it's not really anything great, if you ask me. It's a decent album, but I thought it was kind of disappointing. Next, we've got the 2 Demon Hunter albums that released this year, being War and Peace. I enjoy both of these albums. I would consider both of them to have some of the band's best material as well. Peace is a much more softer, experimental sort of album, which I can definitely applaud it for. It is the weaker of the 2 in my opinion, but it's still got some really good stuff on it, and War, in my opinion, is a very good album as well. Across both of these albums, some of my favorite songs for War would be On My Side, Lesser Gods, The Negative, and Close Enough. And then for Peace, When the Devil Come, More Than Bones, Loneliness, Recuse Myself. There's some great songs on both of these albums, and I would definitely recommend them. Next is Distance Over Time by Dream Theater. This is another very good album. It's not an album that I went back to a whole lot, at least after the first couple weeks after I listened to it. I listened to it a little bit for like a week or 2 after I first heard it, but not too much since then, but it's still got some great songs on it, like At Wit's End, Pale Blue Dot, Paralyzed. Paralyzed actually is very reminiscent of a Breaking Benjamin song, which I thought was interesting. It's a really good album. I enjoyed it a lot. I would definitely recommend it. Next is The Sea of Tragic Beasts by Fit for an Autopsy. Now this is an album that, in my opinion, has been getting way more praise than it was worth. I thought this was a pretty good album. It was not incredible, but it was good. But it is one of the weaker deathcore releases that I heard this year, in my opinion, which isn't really saying too much. It was a good album, but not really deserving of the praise that it gets, in my opinion. Next is GastiR Ghosts Invited by Gaahls WYRD, or however that's pronounced. This is the solo project by Gahl, who is the ex-vocalist of Gorgoroth. This was a decent album. It wasn't anything incredible. I actually thought it was kind of boring for quite a lot of it, unfortunately. But it's got some good songs on it. I especially enjoyed the songs Carving the Voices, and there was one other one. I can't remember if it was the title track or what, but there's two songs on here that, if I remember correctly, are entirely clean vocals, which, funny enough, given that this is a black metal album, were actually my favorite songs on the album. They were really unique sounding, and I just think that the style of clean vocals used on this album works very well with that style. So I really enjoyed those two songs, and overall, it's not a great album. It is one of the weaker releases of the entire year, if you ask me, but it was still pretty okay. Next, we've got Will of the Primordial by Grima. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but this is an album I was looking forward to quite a bit, actually. I heard one of the songs as a single. I discovered it through YouTube, just came up in my recommended. I really enjoyed it. This is a decent album. It was a bit disappointing for me. But it was good if you're into like atmospheric black metal and stuff like that. This is a pretty good album. The one song that I've really gone back to is that one single, which is titled Enesy, I believe. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it's pronounced, but that's what it looks like to me. That's quite a good song, but otherwise this is a good album, but not anything incredible. Next, we've got Dominion by Hammerfall. Now this is quite a good album that I really haven't gone back to as much as I thought that I would, but it is a very good album, especially if you're a fan of bands like Judas Priest. This is a power metal album, but it is extremely reminiscent of that particular style that Judas Priest kind of has. There were a couple songs on here that really were very reminiscent of that, especially towards the beginning of the album. Some of my favorites are the title track, We Make Sweden Rock, Second to One. There's some really good songs on here for sure, and overall I would recommend it if you're a fan of kind of classic style, traditional metal, or power metal. Next is Auric Gates of Veles by Hate. This is a band that is very similar to kind of blackened death metal such as Behemoth or Belphegor. If you're a fan of those bands, you'll probably dig this album. I didn't think it was incredible, but I thought it was quite good. There's some really good songs on here, like the title track, as well as Sovereign Sanctity, I think is probably the best song on the album, if you ask me. Overall, it was really good. Not one of the best albums of the year, in my opinion, but it was still very good. Next is a bit of a weird one, considering most of these albums are metal albums, but next is the album Futha by Heilung. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is, I guess, it would be considered a neo-folk album. It's based heavily on Scandinavian folk music, which I thought was super interesting, and I heard of this album at one point and I decided to give it a shot, and I really enjoyed it. It is very different. It's really, really cool if it's something that you seem like you might be interested in, and yeah, overall it's a really cool album that I enjoyed quite a lot. Next is The Battle of Yaldabaoth by Infant Annihilator. This is a band that I've never really been that interested in checking out, but I did check out this album, and I will say I was pleasantly surprised. This is a very, very good album. Probably one of the most heavy, extreme albums that I've ever listened to. It's just really good. There's some great songs on here, like Three Bastards, Kingdom Sitteth Lonely Beneath Thine Hollowed Heavens, which is an unusually long song title, of Sacrament and Sincest. There's others as well, like the title track and Necropocalypse, which is the closing track. I really enjoyed, and overall this is a really solid album if you're just looking for something really heavy and aggressive. Next is I the Mask by In Flames. This is, in my opinion, one of the weakest albums of the year that I heard, at least. I understand it's a little bit of a return to form from the last couple of albums, but it really didn't do a whole lot for me. I mean, it's not a bad album by any means. It's got some good songs on it, and overall, it's good. but it's really nothing that incredible in my opinion. So I would say it is one of, if not my least favorite album of the year. Next is Heart Like a Grave by Insomnium. Of course, I was really looking forward to this one, considering that the last album from this band, which was Winter's Gate, was my favorite album of 2016 and still is my favorite album pretty much in general. I love that album. I think it's just really great. And I was really looking forward to this album, seeing how they would follow it up. And it did disappoint me, honestly, at least on first listen. After a couple other listens, it grew on me a little bit. I would say it's one of their weakest albums, but it's got some really good songs on it, like Never Last, Valediction, and Pale Morning Star. Next up is Atonement by Killswitch Engage. This is a really good metalcore album that I enjoyed quite a lot. It's not one of the best albums of the year by any stretch, in my opinion, but it's got some good songs on it, like Unleashed, which, funny enough, is the title of their last album, which I thought was kind of weird to include here. But Unleashed, The Signal Fire, I Am Broken 2, Bite the Hand That Feeds. There's quite a few good songs on this album. It's just not one that I've really cared much to return to, but it is a solid album. Next, we've got The Nothing by Korn. Now, Korn is a band that I've always really struggled to get into, but I did enjoy this album quite a bit. There was some really good stuff on here. Overall, I enjoyed it. Songs like Cold and You Never Find Me, a few others as well, were quite good. Overall, it's a really solid album. And if you're not really a fan of Korn, then I think you should give that album a shot, because I was able to enjoy it, so I'm sure you might too. Next is Pitfalls by Leprous. Now, this is another album I was really looking forward to. I discovered this band and this album through the singles before the album came out, and I was really looking forward to it because I really loved the singles, but it was kind of disappointing for me. But the singles, at least, I think are still quite good. Which are like Below, Alleviate, Distant Bells. I also think Foreigner was a pretty decent song, but overall it was kind of disappointing, but still a good album. Next is Internet Protocol by Master Boot Record. This is quite a good album as well. It's a very unique album. It's like an entirely synthesized metal album, which is not something you see every day. It's a really unique style that I really enjoyed, and overall it was a really good album. Next is The Grand Antiquation by Meadows End. This was another one I was looking forward to quite a bit because it's symphonic melodic death metal, which seems like a combination that would be up my alley, but in the end, this was kind of disappointing. It wasn't bad by any means, but it really didn't grab me all that much. I didn't think it was particularly memorable, but it was still a decent album. Next up is From Darkness to Light by Narnia. Now, this is an album that I was not expecting to go back to as much as I have, but I've actually returned to some songs from this album quite a lot. And overall, it was really enjoyable. Got some good songs on it, like A Crack in the Sky, You Are the Air That I Breathe, the title track, which is split into 2 parts, and my favorite song on the album, probably The War That Tore the Land. So there's some good stuff on here that I've actually gone back to surprisingly often, and overall, it's really good. Next, I've got 3 albums by the same band, which I'm just going to mention all at once because pretty much everything I say about one album could apply to the others. So the band is Nebula Orionis. The 3 albums I heard were To Keep the Flame Burning, Ashes, and Plague. I know that this project did release one other album, I think 1 or 2 other albums this year, but I did not give those a listen. All 3 of these were quite good, kind of symphonic metal, sort of, kind of reminded me of something like Winter Sun, but less power metal influence and less complex musically. But it was still really good. I enjoyed these all 3, just didn't think they were anything that incredible, but I thought it was a kind of a cool style and a little bit of a unique sound as well. Next, we've got The Search by NF. Now, this is a rap album, again, kind of different from anything else on here, much like the Heilung album. This is an album I've gone back to surprisingly often as well, and I really enjoyed it quite a lot. There's some really good songs on here, like The Search, the title track, Nate, Time, Returns, Hate Myself, I Miss the Days, and probably my favorite song on the album I would say is Let Me Go. So overall, this is a really good album. I enjoyed quite a lot. Next is Bloodied Unbowed by O Sleeper. This was quite a highly anticipated album within the metalcore community and for me as well, considering the band's last album came out in 2011. But this was a really good album. I wouldn't say it's as good as that album that came out in 2011, Children of Fire, but it's still good. It's got some good songs on it like Two Ships, Let It Wave, Decimation of Burial, Oxygen. There's some good songs on here. Next is In Cauda Venenum, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, by Abbath. This is a band that I've been interested in checking out for a while, but I haven't really looked into that much. But this is a really good album. I enjoyed it quite a lot, especially kind of the middle of the album with songs like Lovelorn Crime, Charlatan, which is probably either that or The Garroter is my favorite on the album. I would probably actually lean towards The Garroter. And Universal Truth, those 4 songs are all really great. Overall, I would really highly recommend this album if you're a fan of progressive metal or progressive rock. Next is Hail Stand by Periphery. This is another band that I've thought about checking out for quite some time, and I did really enjoy this album quite a bit. I really enjoyed the opening track, Reptile, which is almost 17 minutes long, which is quite impressive for an opening track especially. Blood Eagle is really good, and It's Only Smiles is probably my favorite song on the album. So overall, it's a really good album if you're a fan of progressive metal or gent or metalcore, which this album kind of combines elements of all 3. I would recommend this album. Next, we've got The Verdict by Queensryche, which in my opinion is a criminally underrated album from 2019. I've seen barely anybody mention it when they're talking about the best albums of 2019. I wouldn't call it one of the absolute best, like top 5 or anything, but it is still a really good album with some really good songs like Man the Machine, Light Years, Dark Reverie, Bent, Portrait. There's some really good stuff on here. If you're a fan of like Iron Maiden, progressive metal in general, I would recommend this album. It's really good. Definitely underrated in my opinion. Next is the self-titled or untitled, I'm not sure which, album by Rammstein, which is their return album. Been a long time since their last album. This is a band, again, that I've been kind of wanting to get into since I do really enjoy the band Icebreaker, which is kind of similar. This was a really good album. I enjoyed quite a lot. Some of my favorites were Deutschland, Auslander, which is probably my favorite, Pup, or however that's pronounced. I really enjoyed this album quite a bit. I haven't returned to it that much, but it was a really solid album, and I would definitely recommend it. Next is the Evening Hate EP by Red. Now, those of you who have been following me for a while would probably know Red is one of my absolute favorite bands. And I will say this EP rather did kind of disappoint me. Firstly, because they released almost every song on it prior to its release. But also, I just didn't think it was that great. I mean, it's a good EP, but I would say that the 2 original songs, being The Evening Hate and From the Ashes, are among the weakest that Red has ever done. The cover, Hemorrhage, originally by the band Fuel, I believe, was good, but not incredible. I would actually say my favorite song on the EP is the alternate version of The Evening Hate. Overall, it was a decent EP, but nothing that incredible. Next is The Eighth Mountain by Rhapsody of Fire. This is a power metal album that I really enjoyed quite a lot. I think you're a fan of stuff maybe like that Hammerfall album I talked about earlier, or even stuff like Blind Guardian. You'll probably enjoy this album. There were some really good songs on here that I enjoyed, like White Wizard, Warrior Heart, March Against the Tyrant, 7 Heroic Deeds. There's a lot of good songs on here as well that I enjoyed quite a bit, so I would definitely recommend that one. Next is Moritat by Dorot Milan, which is a black metal album, one of the first albums I heard this year, I believe. And this is one that I haven't really returned to at all, but I did think it was quite good, so I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but it was a good album. Next is The Heretics by Rotting Christ. This is an album I was looking forward to quite a bit, actually, and I really enjoyed it quite a lot. There's some really good songs on here, like In the Name of God, Heaven and Hell and Fire, Dies Irae. Overall, this is a really good album that I enjoyed quite a bit. If you're a fan of black metal, then I would definitely recommend this. It's kind of a very different style of black metal when you compare it to bands like the Norwegian bands like Gorgoroth, Immortal, Darkthrone, stuff like that. It's a very different style, but I really like it a lot. Next, we've got The Great War by Sabaton. Now, if you know my history with Sabaton, you would know that they're one of my favorite bands. I really enjoy their music a lot, and this album did not disappoint, in my opinion. It's got a lot of really great songs on it, like 7 Pillars of Wisdom, 82nd All the Way, Fields of Verdun, the title track Great War, The Red Baron. There's so many great songs on this album. I would say it's possibly the band's best album. It's between that and Careless Rex, and I actually have a very tough time choosing between the two. But this is a really, really good album, and I would definitely recommend it. It's one of my favorite albums of the year. Next is Forgotten Past by Seor. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is an atmospheric black metal album, kind of with some folk metal elements in there. I enjoyed this album. I didn't think it was anything incredible, but it was good. I haven't really returned to it much either, but it was a good album. If you're a fan of this kind of music, then I would probably recommend it to you. I know a lot of other people have enjoyed it far more than I did. Next up is Melancholy by Shadow of Intent. This is an album that actually really impressed me. It's kind of a symphonic deathcore album, which is not something that I see very often, but I enjoyed this album quite a bit more than I expected to. There's a lot of great songs on here, like the title track. My favorite song is probably Dirge of the Void. I also really enjoyed Chthonic Odyssey. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, but there's some great songs on here. I was thoroughly impressed by this album. I enjoyed it more than I expected to, so I would definitely recommend it. Next up is Victorious by Skillet. Now, this is, once again, an album that I went back to more than I expected. Only a couple songs, but still. This was a decent album. I don't know if I would say it was better than Unleashed, which in my opinion is one of their best. And there's some good songs on here like Legendary Victorious, Save Me, and Anchor. So there's some good songs on here, but it's nothing incredible, but it's a good album. Next we've got We Are Not Your Kind by Slipknot. Now once again, much like Korn, this is a band that I've struggled to get into, but I did really enjoy this album quite a bit. Songs like Unsainted, Critical Darling, Spiders, Orphan. There's some really good songs on here. I haven't returned to it too much, but it is a very good album, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're like me and haven't been able to get into Slipknot. Maybe this album will be able to help you out. Next, we've got Verkleiden by Soilwork. This was, I believe, the first album that I heard this year, and it was a decent album. It's nowhere near as good, in my opinion, as their previous album, The Ride Majestic, but it's a decent album. It's got some good songs on it, like Arrival, Stalfagal, and The Ageless Whisper. It's not a great album, I would say, but it's got some good songs on it. It was kind of disappointing, but it's a decent album. Next up, we've got yet another album that really disappointed me, which is Divisions by Starset. This is a band that I've been enjoying for the last couple of years. I really enjoyed their last album, Vessels, but this album really disappointed me quite a bit. There's still some good songs on here, like Perfect Machine, Solstice. Solstice probably being my favorite on the album, as well as Where the Skies End, and some other songs that have some really good ideas that I really liked, like Manifest, Telekinetic, Trials, and Diving Bell, but they just didn't quite get there for me. This was kind of a disappointing album in my opinion. Still got some good songs on it, but it's easily the band's weakest if you ask me. Next up, we've got When the Shadow is Forced into the Light by Swallow the Sun. This is a really great album as well. This was one of the first albums I heard in 2019, and there's some great songs on here. It's one album that I've gone back to quite a bit, actually. Some of my favorites include the title track, The Crimson Crown, Firelights. Probably my favorite song on the album is Here on the Black Earth. Overall, if you're a fan of doom metal or melodic death metal or anything like that, I would definitely recommend this album. It's really, really good. Next up is Human Target by Thy Art is Murder. This is an album I was looking forward to quite a bit, since Thy Art is Murder is a band that I really enjoy. And I would say this album was a little bit disappointing for me. Not too much, because it was very much still very Thy Art is Murder, still sounded very much like Thy Art is Murder, but it really wasn't anything new or different or exciting, I guess. But it was a good album that I did enjoy. Some good songs on here like New Gods, and my favorite song on the album probably is Atonement. Overall, it's a very good album. Not one of the band's best, I think, but it's still quite good. Next up, we've got possibly the most highly anticipated album of the year for many people, which was Fear Inoculum by Tool. This is an album that I actually did enjoy quite a lot. There's some great songs on here like the title track, Pneuma, or however that's pronounced, and Tempest. It's a really good album. I enjoyed it. I would say it was a bit repetitive, which is my main complaint with the album. It was just kind of repetitive. That in turn made it feel like it was kind of dragging on, not really going anywhere in some places. I actually had to check to make sure that some songs weren't on repeat, because I actually thought I was listening to the same songs over and over again at a couple of points. But the music was still quite good, and I did enjoy it. Next, we've got Empath by Devin Townsend. Now, I did say I was going through this in alphabetical order. I'm literally just going through my Rate Your Music account for every album I heard in 2019. Not sure why this is so low. This is my favorite album of the year. I really love this album. It's just great from beginning to end. It engages me from beginning to end, no matter what, pretty much. And there's some great songs on here like Genesis and Spirits Will Collide, which is probably my favorite on the album. I really love that song. Hear Me, Why, Singularity, which is a 23-minute long closer. It's just a great album all around. If you're a fan of progressive metal, then I would highly recommend you listen to this album. It is just incredible. I've never heard anything like it. It's just great. Next is Hell by Tyr. This is a folk metal band that I've actually been a fan of for quite a few years, but this is the first album I've heard in full by them. This was a pretty good album as well. I did actually enjoy it quite a lot, but it's just kind of gotten buried by all the other music that came out this year, but it was very good. There's some great songs on here like Gates of Hell, Sunset Shore, Downhill Drunk, Fire and Flame. So overall, I did really enjoy this album quite a lot. I would definitely recommend it. Next, we've got Reign in Supreme Darkness by Vargrav. This is a symphonic black metal album that I did enjoy quite a bit. I didn't think it was anything incredible, but it was pretty good and very reminiscent of bands like Emperor, for example. So if you're a fan of Emperor, you'll probably enjoy this. I haven't really returned to it at all, but it was a good album. Next up, we've got Void by War of Ages. This is actually a really good metalcore album. I was looking forward to this album a decent amount, and I wasn't looking forward to it like a whole lot, but I was looking forward to it, especially due to songs like Miles Apart, which is probably my favorite song on the album, and it was one of the singles. And this was an album that actually surprised me just by how good it was. I really enjoyed a lot of it. Sulfur and Salt, Void, The Watchers, Greed, a lot of good songs on here. A few of them even remind me heavily of a band like As I Lay Dying. So if you're a fan of As I Lay Dying, I would at least recommend listening to songs like Greed and Wrath. But overall, it was a really good album. I enjoyed it. Next up, we've got The Valley by Whitechapel. Now, this was a very interesting album because this is a deathcore band, but this was a very experimental album. It has a lot of Queen sections in it, some Queen singing, some acoustic sections, stuff like that, especially if you listen to the song When a Demon Defiles the Witch, which is the first song on the album. You get a good sense of the sort of dynamicism that this album has going with it. And this is a really good album. I enjoyed it a lot. I would definitely recommend it. Next up is Resist by Within Temptation. This is an album I returned to quite a lot in the first half of the year. I really enjoyed it. It has fallen off for me a little bit, but I still think it's quite good. Some good songs on here like The Reckoning, Raise Your Banner, In Vain, Mercy Mirror, and probably my favorite song on the album is Endless War, which is a song that I do really enjoy. So overall, it was a very good album. If you're a fan of like hard rock, alternative metal, any of that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend this one. And finally, the last album I'll be going over is Eclipse by Wolves at the Gate. This is one of my favorite albums of the year. I was really looking forward to it since I really enjoy Wolves at the Gate's music. In my opinion, this is actually their best album. I've returned to it quite a lot ever since it came out, with songs like The Cure, Face to Face, Evil Are the Kings, the title track, which is probably my favorite on the album, Counterfeit, Voice in the Violence. There's a bunch of great songs on here, and I would highly recommend it. But anyways, that is it for this video. I'm sorry if it takes a while. Currently, I'm going on 45 minutes recording this video, so it's kind of insane. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. What were some of your favorite albums of the year? Is there anything that you heard that I missed, or anything like that? Leave a comment down below and let me know. But that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you guys next time.